A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. I'm Amarachi Ubani, and let's bring you up to speed now with developments out of Ukraine in the last couple of hours. We begin with President Volodymyr Zelensky vowing to restore Ukrainian rule over Russia-annexed Crimea, a move he says would help re-establish world law and order. He was addressing an international conference attended by about 40 presidents and prime ministers, all but one of them attending online. The Polish President Andrzej Duda himself in Kyiv, sitting beside the Ukrainian president there for the Crimea platform, as seeks to restore Ukraine's territorial integrity and end Russia's annexation of Crimea. In his opening address, President Zelensky said, "Where it all began, it will end there." Speaking about Crimea, he told counterparts that Russia has turned Crimea into an ecological disaster zone and a military springboard for aggression, using it to fire 750 cruise missiles at cities and communities. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson also attended the conference remotely, though, told fellow leaders that Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea is a direct precursor of today's war.
Putin forcibly annexed the territory of a European country and forcibly redrew a European frontier for the first time since 1945. He ignored the fact that Russia itself had repeatedly recognized Crimea as being part of Ukraine, and he broke so many international agreements that I can't list them all. Ever since the annexation, the people of Crimea have endured a brutal and systematic campaign of human rights abuses by the Russian authorities.
Meanwhile, Ukraine has imposed a 2-day curfew over the northeastern city of Kharkiv as fears grow that Russia might attack during the country's Independence Day anniversary. A curfew begins 7 p.m. local time today and ends at 7 in the morning of Thursday. Kharkiv has come under frequent and deadly longer-range artillery and rocket fire since Russia launched what it calls a special military operation to demilitarize its smaller neighbor and protect Russian-speaking communities on February 24. A Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov today met with his Syrian counterpart in Moscow to discuss topical issues of international and regional agenda. Syria and North Korea are the only UN member states that have recognized the self-proclaimed People's Republic of Eastern Ukraine, along with Russia. The Syrian Foreign Minister Faisal Mekdad said Russia's special military operation in Ukraine was a just, necessary war, and he hoped that Russian forces would complete the task assigned by President Vladimir Putin in the coming days and weeks. Security has been beefed up, however, in the Ukrainian capital ahead of tomorrow's Independence Day as it braces for a surge in Russian attacks. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Moscow could try something particularly ugly in the run-up to the anniversary. It's now 6 months since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Scores of people have died and there has been widespread destruction of cities, while the conflict itself is said to be locked in a stalemate. Today, however, is Flag Day in Ukraine. It comes a day just before the Independence Day celebrations, which is tomorrow. It will be 31 years since Ukraine became independent of the former Soviet Republic. And much earlier, President Zelensky vowed to raise the Ukrainian flag in currently Russian-occupied parts of the country. He held a flag-raising ceremony as well as saying, in those occupied temporarily, it will wave forever. In Melitopol, over the Square of Victory, where a flag off those who will lose this war cannot be. Blue and yellow flag will be raised in Kherson over the Square of Freedom. His words were followed by a moment of silence in honor of those who have lost their lives to the current conflict with Russia. Kyiv has banned public celebrations of Independence Day, citing a threat of more attacks. Security concerns have also been heightened for U.S. citizens who have been told by the government to leave Ukraine, believing that Russia is preparing to target civilian and government infrastructure over the next few days as the war reaches the 6-month mark. A warning follows that of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. A statement from the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv says the Department of State's information that Russia is stepping up efforts to launch attacks against Ukraine's civilian infrastructure and government facilities in the coming days. It said that U.S. citizens should leave Ukraine now by their own means if it is safe to do so. It won't be the first time that the U.S. will be issuing such a warning. Russia is blaming Ukrainian forces for the shelling in an area just near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant on Monday with Western long-range weapons. Zaporizhzhia is one of the largest nuclear power complexes in Europe. It generates a quarter of Ukraine's total electricity and has been under control of Russian forces since March. It's also been the scene of military strikes in recent days. A Russian side said that the Ukrainian armed forces on Monday used long-range weapons provided by the United States to shell the city of Energodar. A thermal power plant near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was shelled, killing one civilian and injuring another. Ukraine has not responded to the allegation. Russia's defense ministry also says its forces have downed a Ukrainian Su-27 fighter jet over the Kharkiv region of eastern Ukraine. In its briefing today, Defense Ministry spokesperson Igor Konashenkov said Moscow has destroyed 2 U.S.-made M777 howitzer artillery guns. The report cannot be independently verified. This is pretty interesting. Some Russian experts believe in the bombardment of Ukrainian cities by Russian forces has consolidated the will and resolve of the Ukrainian people to continue fighting and has brought new life to NATO, they say. They also say neither side is showing any signs of laying down arms and brokering a peace deal, and that the war has also unified NATO and unified support for Ukraine.
You know, there was a comparison of David and Goliath, right? How Ukrainian armed forces were able to repel, especially around Kyiv, in small units, mobile units, understanding the terrain. So that gave confidence to Western allies to supply more armaments. And we do see evolution of that strategy. But still, I would argue that there is a kind of a discrepancy where Kyiv would like to have more faster, and the West is doing a very calibrated supply in order to either still leave an off-ramp to Russia or to bog Russians down without making much progress, but not really defeating Russian forces on the ground in a total defeat.
This has revivified NATO. I mean, after the debacle in Afghanistan, NATO now has a new purpose, which is really its old purpose, containing Russia. And it really means the US has to, continue to re-engage in Europe. And of course, what the Europeans worry about is what happens in 2024 in the United States presidential election, that could change that again. But as long as you have a US government that is committed to the alliance, we are back to a situation where the US and its allies in Europe and Asia will be, allied against the combination of Russia and China.
I want to bring in a security analyst, David Otto. He's in London. David, thank you for joining me this evening. While Ukraine expects a barrage of Russian missile strikes tomorrow, and so does the US and every other European country who has been following what's been going on since February 24th, they're expecting a barrage of missile strikes tomorrow in Ukraine because it's their Independence Day and the strikes will be coming from Russia. Do you think Russia is really planning a massive attack against Ukraine on its Independence Day, especially on the capital, Kyiv?
Amarachi, I think, of course, that has been the narrative that the United States has put out through the State Department, warning Ukraine that there is a possibility that, Russia will launch a number of missiles, beyond, of course, the Donbas eastern region where it has its strongholds, perhaps. But no one really knows. No one is in the mind of Vladimir Putin to know what exactly he's going to do. Again, this coincides, as you rightly said, with the independence of Ukraine from the old Soviet Union. And this is, again, comes, at a time when we are now the 6th month into a now conflict, of course, which Russia called a special military operation. So nobody really knows what Russia intends to do. But these are all speculations, which, of course, the West is putting out. We don't know because Putin hasn't said anything. He doesn't normally speak. So we just have to wait and see. But it's a good call for Ukraine, to prepare its defensive posture, in the expectation that if Russia does launch, they can defend themselves.
And that's a really terrible place to be in, isn't it? The part of the unknown, not knowing what would happen on Independence Day. I mean, today is Flag Day. The much that's happened so far is the attack on Zaporizhia, the small facility within Zaporizhia, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. So at the conference this morning, President Zelensky said the war started with the Russian annexation of Crimea. A number of world leaders have also attributed the war to that's where it began. And they also call for Russia to give up Crimea as well. But do you think it's realistic of the Ukrainian president to talk about regaining, the peninsula, to regain the Crimea region from from Russia, when it's still trying to kick Russia out of territory it already controls, which is the other parts of Ukraine?
I think it's a Herculean task, for kind of an ambition for the Ukrainian president to set for Ukraine, considering the fact, as you rightly mentioned, that they still haven't been able to, dominate Russia positions in the east and the south, in the Donbas region, where Russia literally controls that region. So let alone talk about the possibility of regaining the Crimean territory, which was taken from Ukraine in 2014. This is a very difficult task. But of course, Vladimir Zelensky has to portray, the image that Ukraine, has the capacity to retake all territories that have been taken from it by Russia. That's the only way that, it guarantees that it has the support of its citizens. And it's another way of guaranteeing that the Europeans and the NATO allies and the United States who are backing Ukraine, continue to do so. But from a military perspective, Russia is such a big nation compared to Ukraine, and I don't see the possibility of Ukraine militarily retaking either the Donbas region or Crimea, and I don't think Russia is going to give that up as we speak. So it's good for Ukraine in terms of morale, but from a military perspective, I don't see that happening.
Now, we played a clip just before we came to you. There was a clip of some analysts in Russia who actually think that, the war continues as no side is willing to lay down arms. But this was another clip we didn't play, and that was of the French President Emmanuel Macron at the Crimea conference this morning, saying that the EU support for Ukraine will not wane. He's saying that the struggles against Russia's invasion will continue for the long term. We already know, we've already established, this war continues in its 6th month now. How much longer do you think that Europe can continue to keep up with the support for Ukraine during this war?
I think within and beyond Europe, Amarachi, we've seen the impact of this war, not just from the fact that Europe is spending a huge amount of money and weaponry to support Ukraine, but from the high prices of fuel and gas. And, some people have described what Europe is about to witness as a winter of discontent, because, there is a possibility that, this war would have a terrible impact on Europe. But again, as I mentioned earlier on, this goes beyond Europe. I think the only country that we've seen actively before South Africa is Turkey, that has tried and continuously tries to mediate. We've also seen, of course, the UN mediating, on the release of some of the grains that were stored in Ukraine. We've seen that being successful. But throughout this war, in the 6th month that we are in, what we've seen is a continuous support for one side or the other. And that gives us, hopelessness in terms of, how long, it will take for this war to end. Neither Vladimir Putin, from Russia, nor Vladimir Zelensky from Ukraine, is showing any signs of giving way some leverage. So, dark days to come as we approach the winter.
Yeah, and Russia already accuses Ukraine of being behind the killing of the daughter of the Russian ultra-nationalist Alexander Dugin. Ukraine has denied the accusation and says that this is not the way it works. That's literally what, the commander said. Who do you believe in this instance? And do you think that this may have any impact on the war, or is it an act of sabotage?
Amarachi, I think what is very clear is that Daria, Dugina, who is the daughter of a well-known Russian ultra-nationalist, as they call him, her death has brought a lot of questions to be asked. I mean, what some analysts are saying that perhaps this was an internal Russian intelligence job to use it as an excuse to launch attacks, on Ukraine on a day or at a time when Ukraine wants to celebrate its 31st independence, from Russia. I mean, or the former Soviet Union. I think, again, what the Russians are saying is that, this is a Ukrainian, job. I mean, they're saying that Ukraine has brought in mercenaries or spies or sleeper cells, that are conducting terrorist attacks within, Russia itself. It could also be that Ukraine wants to provoke Russia to then launch an attack, to win the morality of, the Western nations to continue to support Ukraine. But, it's neither here nor there. Investigations are still going on. But I don't see any, form of, transparency because, of course, the attack happened in Russia and Russia is blaming Ukraine.
Indeed, I guess we'll have to leave it there. The analyst I spoke to earlier today said it's a bit too early to make the call on who and what side may be telling the truth at this time. David Otto, thank you again for your analysis.
Thank you.
Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says there will be no mercy for the organizers, the instigators and the perpetrators of the murder of Daria Dugina, a daughter of the Russian ultra-nationalist Alexander Dugin, who was killed in a car bomb on Saturday. Addressing a news conference today, he said an investigation is ongoing to determine the perpetrators. His comment, of course, comes as a memorial service held today for Daria. Some of her friends said they were hopeful her death could help convey the message to the government that it is time to stop playing around with special military operations. One of them even said it's time to start a war, a serious war. Another respondent, TV presenter Dmitry Kiselyov, says the only possible response Russia could take is the compromising denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine. Dugina's father, a vocal supporter of both Putin and Russia's military operation in Ukraine, said only Russian victory in Ukraine could justify his daughter's death. President of the service as well, where parliamentary leaders of the three main pre-Kremlin parties all hailed Daria as a patriot and promised that those who had ordered and carried out her murder would get their just desserts.